You know when you hear those samples that are just so fire and you feel like, why do mine just never sound like that? Every sound is in its perfect place, they're minimal but yet full. That's the magic of producers like Coop the Truth, Nami and other top sample makers. And today, I'm breaking down exactly how to make placement ready samples just like them. But not just by showing you what I did, I'm giving you the actual mindset hacks behind it. Because let's be real, most people try to cook up R&B melodies by just throwing down some soulful chords and a few chops and calling it a day. And that's why 99% of samples sound so mid. But the real sauce, it's not just in what you add, it's in what you leave out. And by the end of this video, you'll understand exactly how to create pro-level samples by focusing on 3 areas. But why do I have the keys? I'm B-Sticks, I've sold a ton of sample packs, and I've had loads of cuts on TV and over 1 million plays on YouTube. So we're going to get into these 3 areas, and there's going to be more gems along the way. So stick with me, because the biggest game changer is coming at the end of the video.
Sample preview. Texture. And what better way to analyze texture than by looking at one of the man himself samples, Coop the Truth. I'm too good to you guys, so if you appreciate, go subscribe and follow me on Instagram at B-Sticks Production. Look at this, guys. I have highlighted Coop's textures in red for you, so you can see just what he's doing here. And I want you to think about textural beds that are created possibly from little fragments of other sounds and synths, and then processed using VSTs, granular delays, all kinds of reverbs, maybe like shimmer reverbs or spring reverbs, filters. And then I want you to think about the sounds that you use themselves for your harmonic sounds, like your guitars, your synths and keyboards and things, as how you can extract or add as much texture from those as well as possible, even your percussion. And I'm going to show you how we can, use a few ideas to add texture there as well. So the first thing to note, which you can see without even listening, is that Coop's got 3 texture beds here, and not one of them runs for the entire length of the sample. I'm going to solo these textures for you and just play a little bit of each one going into the other one, so you can kind of see how even with textural sounds you can have variations that are interesting. I mean, you might think, oh, I'm just going to chuck a vinyl crackle in for the whole length of the sample, but no, that's not what is going on here. If you want to up your game to the next level of texture, then use some of these tips right here. The extra hot sauce. Sounds like a kind of reversing, and you can see that it goes from quiet to loud, and it's almost pulsating, which suggests to me there's some kind of either sidechaining effect, or maybe like he's repeating it on a little loop, or using some kind of filter and the filter's opening up. So experiment with using filters for your textures, and maybe if you take like a couple of plucks and you just let that play, maybe leave that going for 8 bars, then change up your textural sound here for your... Wow. This almost sounds like a tape recorder sort of reversing or going crazy, whereas this first one was maybe a little bit more melodic. This one sounds atonal, which means it hasn't really got a note in itself. It's more just a kind of background effect that's adding to the ambience. Watch this. If we play the whole sample now with the texture in, and then I'm going to mute that texture, and you're going to see the difference that it makes. Wow, it really adds to the bounce as well. So think about texture. They don't have to be percussive sounds, but they're kind of adding to that movement and the percussion of the sound of the whole sample itself. And how about this third one? Well, chops texture, it's even called. So he's probably chopped out either a guitar or a keyboard sound or a kalimba sound. We've got a kalimba down here, and he's maybe like using this a couple times. some kind of delay on there, some kind of reverb on there. There's some filtering. When I say filtering, I mean like EQ filtering, because you can't really hear any tops in that sound as well. But again, it's more of a melodic sound rather than just like an atonal sound. I want to touch on the percussion now, which adds texture in a different kind of way. I'll show you a way you can maybe add something like this as well. So it sounds like he's almost knocking like marbles together or something. I mean, you can try something like this where maybe I'm just tapping on my table. And if you record that with your phone, which is going to give you like a lo-fi quality and record some background noise into that as well. And his second percussion track here. Sounds like this is layered sound with some kind of ambience where he's maybe raised up the noise floor of the mic, so you're picking up a lot of hiss in the background. I mean, you could add like tape hiss to emulate this kind of texture here, bunch it in with a percussive sound, maybe even sidechain the noise so that it ducks every time that percussion sound hits. You know, just think creatively, think outside the box. And you can also see that the velocity of these hits are all different, almost like he's actually tapping out in real time along with the sample. Look, you've got 3 here that are all different velocities. You've got another one with different velocity. And then with the sounds themselves, look at this kalimba. It's a textural sound in itself, and there are some good kalimba sounds in Omnisphere that you can go and check out. So again, this is touching on sound selection, but again, he's thinking how textural can every sound be in itself. How can they all add to the bigger picture here? Just experiment with like short reverbs or maybe a really short delay. So let's jump back into our sample and see how I use some of these tactics and techniques in texture to add texture to the sample that we're looking at today. And you're probably thinking like there's some magic plug-in or it must be complicated, but it's actually the opposite. Great samples are built on simplicity with purpose. Now, most people focus on what they play, but the pros focus on how it feels. All right, let's look practically at how we can use texture as a kind of evolving feature of our samples that continues to develop. I'll show you what I've done here. So initially, if we go straight to this textural bed, and I did drag in just a forest floor sound. However, I use this auto filter to give it some movement like we saw in Coop's sample. If I just solo it for you. And if I take this auto filter off, it just sounds like we've done a field recording in a forest. So use filters to give some movement. I could even sidechain it to my taps so that it moved with the rhythm of the percussive elements of the sample. I'm just trying to get you to think creatively here, think outside the box. I recorded some guitar and I bounced it out and I stretched the notes, and I also added some long reverbs on and EQ'd it for you. And I also brought this in from bar 3 instead of it coming in from the beginning of the sample. I stopped it here and I carried it on again here. I'm just taking some of those ideas from Coop and borrowing them. This texture that I created from a multi-keys patch that we'll go over in a second at bar 9 coming in. And how I made that was using this bubble clicker preset here, using Filter Freak with this really good plugin to kind of add interesting movement to textures, and then a bit of EQ, which is not doing very much at all. And as you can see, look, this texture comes to here, this texture comes to here, and then I've got this kind of reverse that's going throughout. So that's my kind of nod to Coop texturally with beds. On my percussion sounds, I added this, which is a really lo-fi, you've seen this before, lo-fi reverb, which adds texture. But you can use any kind of like old school lo-fi reverb plugin or even delay to achieve a similar result. And I added another percussion sound utilizing that same plugin, but also added a phaser onto the percussion sound. Don't be afraid to use phasers on percussion. Don't say I'm not good to you guys. I'm going to demonstrate like a trick with this tape hiss here. and just this percussion sound. And I add a compressor to the tape hiss and make its input this rim here, and then watch what happens. We get this kind of interesting effect. We could add a filter onto this as well. See these texture tricks you can play with here? And if we take that off now. There's a little bonus source for you there. So in my sound selection, I also added texture. We've got this multi-keys here. I dropped in some of Coop's sounds, and when you go to the map, you choose your round robin, and I played out the chords in a kind of broken staccato type of way. Multi-keys in themselves are very textural. If you haven't got access to like some of the kind of strange instruments that Coop's got, the kalimbas and all those kind of things, or even Omnisphere, but you can get your hands on pigments, this multi-keys can give you a way of getting texture into your sound selection in a really nice way. Bass wise, I put a little saturation on my bass here to add a bit of texture as well. So I'm just thinking with every sound texture. And guitar wise, I use some of my pedals, so you know, you may not have access to those, but plugins are really cool, and I did use a phaser on one of these as well. Coop loves to use guitars. If you need guitars, hit me up, I got you. That's a few ways how I added texture. Space. Not the kind that is above us all the time, but space is where a lot of producers mess up. They think that good samples are built, but really good samples are sculpted. It's what you remove and leave out that really makes the difference here. The best samples always breathe. Think back to those Coop examples that you just think sound so good. That's because silence is just as powerful as sound. I want you to listen to this keyboard part and contrast the part that I actually used, which is here, to a part where I've made every single one of these chords legato. That means just running into the next chord. It's very subtle, but I want you to hear the difference here. See how much more of a vibe that one with space has? Because your brain loves anticipation, and when you leave space, it makes the listener lean in and pay attention to all the different parts. And it also highlights another device that top sample makers use. Nami actually said that he uses this in all his samples.
So that has the space to talk in its own time, and then this one comes in.
It's call and response. Treat your melodies like a conversation. If everything's playing at once, there's no dialogue, right? Imagine two people having a conversation. They're both talking at each other at the same time. You're not getting anywhere. However, if one thing, ba-ba-da, then another, na-na-na, then boo-doo-doo, then So the best samples, they feel like they're telling a story, and space is what makes that possible. But even if you get texture and space correct, if your sound selection is off, it's still not going to hit. Sound selection. Now we've kind of touched on this by looking at Coop samples, and every move has been made with intention. What are you looking to achieve? What kind of emotions you want to pull out of this sample and give the listener? And how are you going to achieve that? And sound selection plays a massive part. When I started this sample, I went for this textural pad sound in the Sky Keys. And I know that the Sky Keys has perfect sounds for these kind of samples, as does Omnisphere, even before any plugins are added. It's an emotive sound. It's a great sound. Now, contrast this with just an electric piano. Sounds kind of flat and a little bit dead, you know? And with sound selection, I'm thinking about the available sonic space that I have, from the very low sounds to the mid-range sounds to the high-end sounds. I'm always keeping things simple. I mean, as you saw in Coop's sample, and I like to stick to this rule, I really, including textures, I'll have like maybe 14, 15 sounds in total to my sample. If it starts getting more than that, I'm adding stuff that doesn't need to be there. It's very important that when you choose the sounds that you're going to have, they're the right sounds. Think about maybe 1 or 2 synths for the mid-range, a lead sound on top, a multi-keys that maybe takes up a lot of the range, and a nice bass that's going to take up the bottom, with a couple of textures thrown in that are constantly evolving throughout. So now you know that texture, space and sound selection are your keys here. But there is the one last tip, and this is the most important tip, and all these different things contribute to this, and that is arrangement. Because a great sample isn't just a loop, it's an experience. And if you want a full breakdown on how to arrange your samples like a pro, comment below. And if you found this valuable, hit like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.